they're a pretty big part of uh, Darkseid and the uh, general mythology behind Darkseid. Maybe not as well known in 1987. If anything, probably a lot of younger readers would say, hey, they look nothing like the Superpowers toy. But here's the look that they have. Um, Not too far off from the look of Warhounds as they've been presented in more recent times. Interesting to see here where Kent Nelson has the Helm of Naboo ripped off his head. People don't recognize him. Interesting to see Kent Nelson appears as a young man. Kent Nelson's time would not be too tremendously long in the DCU, at least not past Legends. He would be an important player in the Justice League in the early going, but then he would undergo, or rather, Dr. Fate would undergo a couple of pretty interesting transformations over the course of the Copper Age. Of course, the explanation here with Kent Nelson looking so young is that it was the power of Dr. Fate that kept him and Inza looking so young. It also speaks to DC's editorial policy that they were focused on younger heroes, the senior citizenry of the DC superhero community, aka the other members of the JSA, had all been dispatched to Limbo sometime prior to the start of Legends. Looking here at the confrontation between Captain Boomerang and G. Gordon Godfrey, and then the eventual extraction of of Boomerang. Again, just shows us that in this post-crisis DCU, you could have villains who did things which were, in the end, for the side of good, but still it wasn't quite so black and white as one member of the Suicide Squad felt no qualms about taking out one of his teammates. Looking at G. Gordon Godfrey's seduction of Bronze Tiger on page 13, I want to say that following Legends, Bronze Tiger would have some ill feelings about the fact that he was seduced by Godfrey, and so this was one of his reasons for being part of the Suicide Squad, in addition to being one of the heroes who was being counted upon to help Rick Flag keep tabs on the villains, make sure that they were staying in line. Looking at Batman taking on a group of thugs at the Smithsonian here, Batman's dialogue here makes him feel very much more in line with the pre-crisis Batman here. He's not exactly joking, but I mean, he's still talking to the criminals. And this really speaks to the fact that prior to Legends, the DC Universe was a pretty nebulous place where there were elements of the post-crisis Earth which felt more like the pre-crisis Earth 1, whereas other elements felt completely new. I mean, this speaks to the fact that Batman Year 1 had not been complete at this point. So a little bit of back and forth with Batman during this time. Now, to take a closer look at Wonder Woman's entry into the story. As I mentioned way back at the beginning of my look at DC's Legends, the original plan was for Wonder Woman to make her debut at the start or near the start of the first issue of Legends. And George Perez stepped in and voiced his opposition to that. George Perez was very protective of the character during this time. He, of course, was originally tapped to be the penciler and to help out with plotting the series, but then when Greg Potter left the series, he found himself becoming the lead writer as well. And Len Wein provide some assists on the scripting, but after time, Wein felt that Perez had a really good handle on the character, and so he left the book. And Perez's mission from the get-go was to establish a clear and unique role for Wonder Woman in the DC universe. He didn't want her getting lost amongst the other characters. He felt that this was a character who was very deserving of her own place in the DCU, and so during his time on the book, he wanted her to be separate from the rest of the hero community. He was one who made her an ambassador from Themyscira, but more of a focus upon Wonder Woman as a diplomatic character. And so it's very interesting here that she says, I'm Diana, Princess of the Amazons, whom those of man's world shall come to call Wonder Woman. That's just a neat bit of comic booky writing there. But I don't think it was until well after Perez had left the book that Diana would ever refer to herself as Wonder Woman. And just really neat seeing how she rebukes Guy Gardner here, and a nice contrast to her first meeting with another hero in the New 52 era, wherein Superman gives her an innocent smile and says, "You're powerful." That made for a much warmer welcome for her. And so it's easy to see why she's turned off by Guy Gardner here, who can do nothing more than ogle and call her babe. Looking here at pages 19 and 20, where Martian Manhunter steps in, impersonates the president in order to stop the two gunmen. The post-crisis era was really an era in which Martian Manhunter was established as someone who really loved the Earth. Jerry Conway had certainly done some work in that regards during his time on the Justice League of America book. But certainly during the post-crisis era, Martian Manhunter was someone very much like Superman in that he was not of this Earth, and yet he would do anything to protect it, and he never looked for any thanks. All right, I want to skip ahead to the entrance of Robin and the children, namely Lisa Sutton. And the concept of children being innocent and incorruptible is certainly a theme which is played out in a number of stories across various media over the years. And Ostrander plays it up really well here. And it works nicely here that we see that's a child who actually ends up saving the day. Really, if it wasn't for Lisa Sutton and Robin and the other children, this would have gone down very badly for the heroes. I think it's indicative of the fact that Ostrander, Wein, Byrne, everybody involved with this book realized that the DC universe was once again a very young place. And so that youthful optimism in the DC universe is being reflected here through the hope and the optimism of the young people in the DC universe. It's a really neat scene where Godfrey puts on the helmet and it quickly reduces him to a gurgling, babbling, incomprehensible being here. And nice to see that not just anybody can put on the helm of Naboo. I bet there were a lot of Green Lantern readers a couple of years later who were looking back on this issue and saying, oh, geez, why couldn't the Green Lantern Corps have that? Really love the hero's reaction to the people as they're coming to their senses. Just a great piece of dialogue from Superman showing how adept Ostrander and Whedon were in writing for these characters. As Superman doesn't get into a long rant, he says, you are being controlled. There's nothing to forgive. Guy Gardner's characterization is very consistent with how he sounded over in the Green Lantern / Green Lantern Corps book, where he's very aggressive. Now, looking at Captain Marvel's words to Guy Gardner here, take me back to what I was talking about in episode 113, where I was saying that maybe it was here in which readers first saw that Captain Marvel was not a separate personality, rather it was Billy Batson who was aged to physical adulthood and was using the wisdom of Solomon to sound like he was much older. And yet, looking at the words that Captain Marvel is using here, it doesn't sound like somebody who's accessing a source of wisdom. So, I mean, I'm not really sure what to think of at this point, because I know going forward in Giffen and DeMatteis's Justice League, Captain Marvel wasn't entirely childlike, but given the way that he was treated by the other heroes and referenced by ones like Batman, gave one to think that Captain Marvel was much younger in his personality. But still, some really nice words on his part here. Okay, folks, I'm down to less than 2 minutes. And I do want to spend a bit of time talking about the context behind the creation of the post-crisis Justice League. So I'm going to wrap things up here and just say that I'll come back to you next week with part 2 of episode 115. Probably won't be a full-length episode, but it'll give me a chance to talk about how the post-crisis Justice League came to be. And then I do want to do a wrap-up where I talk about what the DC Universe was like going forward after Legends. So please do come back in another 7 days. In the meantime, if you want to leave me some feedback, you can go to the Comics and History Facebook page. And you can also drop me a line at comicsandhistory@gmail.com. Until we meet again over the internet airwaves, this class is dismissed.